All right, so the Pittsburgh Steelers and New York Jets going to be one of the lower scoring matchups of the week, but we do have some interesting storylines here. We have Aaron Rodgers returning to New York, and we also have Justin Fields going back to Pittsburgh. So, obviously, not a lot of points here on the board, and I can see this number coming down even more as it goes on. But when it comes to Aaron Rodgers, this looks like it's going to be the last season for Aaron Rodgers. So, there was a lot of talk about him not having a good season last year, and he actually played well last year. Much to disbelief of a lot of people, it wasn't necessarily the old Aaron Rodgers numbers, but we saw plenty of touchdowns, and we did see a decent amount of yards for Aaron Rodgers. And I think that will continue. It's just going to be a tough game against a very tough New York Jets defense that was 10th against quarterbacks last year. So, I think that there is some upside for Aaron Rodgers, probably more than where he was drafted at like back end quarterback 3 range. I do think this is a tough matchup, and he does profile as a quarterback 3 for me in this matchup. So, I do think Aaron Rodgers will have better days. We got to see what he looks like under Arthur Smith, what the weapons around him look like, DK, Jonnu, etc. But I do think there are better days ahead for Aaron Rodgers. It just doesn't come in this matchup, and you can tell not a lot of points to give. So with Aaron Rodgers off the quarterback 2 radar for me this week, he's more of a QB3. As far as the receivers go, tough matchup across the way for DK Metcalf. Going to see a lot of Sauce Gardner. And, it's not the end of the world for DK Metcalf. He really is the most viable target in this receiving core. So I think he's still worth the play, even though this is a very tough matchup for him. A lot of the guys are healthy now on the Jets. Obviously, a different regime here there with Aaron Glenn. But Aaron Glenn's probably going to be improving the secondary. So I see DK probably not having these wide receiver, like a strong wide receiver 2 day, probably going to be a floor-based wide receiver 2 just based on the target. Not a whole lot of upside here. He could slip into the wide receiver 3 range, but just being the one lonely target that is dominant on this receiving core, I can see DK Metcalf still having at least startability this week against the Jets. Now, if you're looking for that secondary option in the passing game for the Steelers, you can look towards Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson. I'm probably staying away from these guys until we see one become a consistent threat. I can see Calvin Austin having a couple splash plays, maybe even this week. I can see Roman Wilson having a few catches, but I think this offense under Arthur Smith is going to look a little bit different now that Jonnu is in the fold. So, although I'm going to rank him and talk about him a little bit more in the tight end range, Jonnu Smith probably will play a little bit of receiver as well in this offense. So remains to be seen, but Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson, not really interested at all in either of those 2 receivers. I'm curious to see which one emerges as a consistent threat for this offense. As far as the ground game goes, Jaylen Warren just got an extension, just got word that Mike Tomlin said he's going to be the featured back for the foreseeable future. So congratulations to Jaylen Warren on getting the contract, but also for our fantasy teams, this lets us know that Caleb Johnson's probably a little bit further back in the pecking order. So when it comes to Jaylen Warren, I do trust Jaylen Warren as like a RB2. And I've talked about this during the offseason. I said, I think he's going a little bit lower than he should in drafts. So now that he's a starter, this comes off as a top 25 play, especially against a Jets defense where they're going to have to run the football in order to move it downfield. And I can see some throws in the check down game from Aaron Rodgers to Jaylen Warren to give him a little bit more floor as a running back too for your team. And as far as tight end goes, like I said, I think Jonnu profiles a little bit more as like a big slot at times, probably in line, but still use him as a receiver. Aaron Rodgers doesn't have a huge history of throwing to the tight end consistently. But if Jonnu plays more of the receiver role, kind of what we saw with him out of Miami, just as more of a consistent receiving threat, there might be a little bit of value here. And Arthur Smith has used tight ends in the past, so I'm curious to see what it looks like with Jonnu Smith. I think these two actually were paired up together at once. So for me, I think Jonnu is a player that I think he was punished a little too much once he got traded from Miami to Pittsburgh. He was going at the back end tight end 2s. I like Jonnu in this matchup as like a tight end 2, a middling tight end 2 option with a little bit of upside in case this team is blanketing DK Metcalf. So I do like Jonnu Smith, and then obviously Pat Freiermuth, kind of a distant thought right now until we see if he can carve out a role for himself. As far as the Jets go, Justin Fields, obviously a high upside play, very tough matchup against this Pittsburgh defense, which has only gotten better this offseason. So the addition of Jalen Ramsey, and they're already a tough unit. I think this is going to be tough sledding for Justin Fields in the passing game, where he makes his living is in the rushing game. So it would not shock me to see Justin Fields have, a 50 yards of production on the rushing. But, Pittsburgh likes to keep things in-house, and obviously they know his game well. So I know there's a little bit of a revenge factor here for Justin Fields, and I still would start him as like a QB1 for this week. Just know the ceiling is limited. I'm not expecting Justin Fields to have multiple touchdowns in the air or on the ground. This could be a slower game for him, but I do see the rushing upside still there, which could keep him at top 15 quarterback levels and potentially even top 12. So I would have him at the back end QB1 conversation just because of the rushing floor and if he's able to catch something downfield. As far as receivers go, Garrett Wilson obviously is going to be a volume-based back-end wide receiver 1, more high-end wide receiver 2 this week against a very tough Pittsburgh unit that only improved. Last year, they were middling unit against receivers, but I anticipate that number is going to increase this offseason. So I do think that this is going to be a tough matchup for Garrett Wilson, who's going to see all the corners that the Steelers have to offer. And the one saving grace is that he is the funnel in this offense. It's the one receiver. Kind of similarly to what we see on the Pittsburgh side, Garrett Wilson's the one receiver that this Jets unit can trust. So I think the targets will be there somewhere in the 8 to 10 range. It's just a matter of the ball itself. Will he see viable, good targets? Will he see red zone opportunities? Will he see stuff downfield? Or is this going to be a Pittsburgh pass rush that gets to Justin Fields and throws him off a little bit? So I think Garrett Wilson is a safe wide receiver 2. I think he's a little bit more risky as a wide receiver 1. I think you have to start him this week, even with the tough matchup, unless you just have some better options. And then as far as who the secondary receiver in this unit is going to be, there's been talks that Josh Reynolds is going to be the wide receiver 2. Allen Lazard, I don't know if he's all the way back yet, but he is the wide receiver 3 for this unit right now. So we'll see what this looks like. Some big body receivers there on the outside to kind of complement things. I'm assuming that we see a little bit of slot from Garrett Wilson, which should help him free him up a little bit more than normal. But I don't really anticipate Josh Reynolds or Allen Lazard being a consistent option in the passing game for us, enough to talk about on a weekly basis. Until I see something from one of them, probably going to omit them from Jet stuff moving forward. And then as far as the ground game goes, we have Breece Hall and Braylon Allen. Breece Hall, obviously, fallen from grace. He was the RB2 a couple years ago. A lot of people expected him to take a major leap last year, and he didn't. With Aaron Rodgers at center, it was a little bit different. The production just wasn't there. And I think Breece Hall in a contract year, there's been trade rumors about him. There's a lot for him to prove against a very tough Pittsburgh defense. The one saving grace I'll say is that he's involved heavily in the receiving game, and there's been talks that Aaron Glenn wants to use him a little bit more at receiver, give him opportunities in the receiving game, which we would love to see for his PPR value. So I trust that in this. I trust that we're going to see a little bit more out of Breece Hall in the passing game. Justin Fields is one of the highest rates of check down out of any quarterback. So that's a good thing going for Breece Hall, especially if we do want to see him involved in the receiving game. I feel comfortable with Breece Hall as a high-end RB2, back-end RB1 for this matchup. And I think he has some upside, just given the fact that this probably going to be hard. It's going to be hard for this this Jets team to move the ball downfield. Going to be very hard for them to do that against this Pittsburgh defense. So, like I said, points are going to be at a premium, but I do think if they get to the red zone, we'll see Breece Hall have at least a few opportunities. And then Braylon Allen has been the other, talk of this offseason for the Jets. Being used in the red zone is kind of in this role that's going to be a David Montgomery-ish type role under Tanner Engstrand, who was the passing game coordinator for the Lions. So when it comes to Braylon Allen, obviously we need to see it with him before believing. There was a lot of this talk last year that he was going to be heavily involved. He showed flashes, but nothing consistent. All the reports this offseason are that it looks the part of maybe a 1A, 1B type of relationship. Until we see him using the passing game and maybe we even get a better matchup, I would keep Braylon Allen on benches. Unless you need him as a desperation flex, he's probably better on benches for now. There's going to be a point in time where we might talk about him as an RB2 or RB3 for our teams. And at tight end, Mason Taylor is an intriguing name. I talked about how the receiving options were limited for this Jets team. Mason Taylor could step in here, second-round pick for the New York Jets. Could step in nicely to a secondary passing game option. Could be third in the pecking order behind Breece Hall, but potential here against Pittsburgh. If you were going to beat them one way in the passing game last year, it was through the tight end position, and we're going to see how they deploy Jalen Ramsey, if it's going to be against slots, if we're going to see him lined up against tight ends sometimes. So a lot to be determined here from both teams. But for me, if you're going to start Mason Taylor, it better be in like a 16-team league. definitely can wait to see what it looks like from a lot of players in this game. All right.